Okay, today we're going to talk about the ignition system. Conventional distributed ignition, electronic distributed ignition, distributed ignition, waste spark, and coil and plug. Here's a basic ignition system setup. Now, I know it's hard to see with the play button in the middle, but here's the coil. This is an old school system also. Battery, ignition switch, resistor, spark plug, distributor, rotor, and inside a set of old school points. Okay, old school points internally. So what happens is, let's talk about the primary ignition. Battery plus goes to the ignition switch, goes through a resistor to the positive side of the coil. As it goes through this coil, it goes through a whole bunch of windings and come out the negative side. That's very important to remember. On the negative side. And that wire comes from the negative side of the coil over here to the distributor. Now think about this. We got positive here, negative here. That means we have power, a load, so this side has to be the ground. So what grounds it out is the points. Old school for right now. Something called a set of points. When the points are closed, it's being saturated or charged. This coil is being charged up or filled up. A magnetic field is being built. When the points open up, it collapses and you get a spark out the center tower from the secondary ignition. So what happens is that buildup in the magnetic field in the primary circuit collapses. It's going to cut across the secondary windings. You got other windings inside here. Going to cut across the secondary windings and come out the center of this coil here to the distributor. This rotor is going to distribute the spark to each individual cylinder as it rotates. It's going to fire this cylinder, go to the plug. Fire this cylinder, go to the plug. But basically, that's the basic ignition system operation. It all starts with the primary ignition system being charged. And the main trigger for that, for this conventional system, is a set of points. That's another way to look at it. We have a power here, a coil, the negative side again, so you see positive, negative. And look what's going to old school distributor breaker point system. You can see the points right here. The contacts is right there. And here's the distributor cat. As the car is rotating, these points are going to be opening and closing. And it's going to distribute the spark in a firing order. You see here it starts at number 1. Always starts at 1. 1, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2. And you're going to distribute spark to each cylinder to the spark plugs. So it's 2, 4, 6 on this side and 1, 3, 5 on the other side of the bank. And right here is a V8. Same process. Now, that charging of the coil I mentioned earlier, it's called dwell. The dwell time is the amount of time that the ignition primary windings in the coil are held to ground. That's when, understand this, that's when the primary current is flowing in the circuit. Remember, when I ground out that negative side of that coil, current starts to flow to charge the magnetic field inside that coil. Now when the ground is released, the magnetic field collapses and induces voltage in the secondary windings. That's the spark you get. Dwell is measured in relationship to camshaft rotation, angle, and percentage duty cycle. It's usually measured in dwell. As you see here, look here. Here's the lobes that's in the distributor. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 lobes. Alright? Here's the set of points. Here's the, I guess what you call this, the point sits on some kind of lobe here. Some kind of bushing. I forgot the name of it, but some type of bushing that rises against the distributor. As this rotates, this lip is going to open and close the points. As you see right here, when the load hits the high side, the points open up like you see here. But when it has to keep rotating, it's going to be on this flat end. That's when the points are closed, and that's when dwell is being built up, or the coils being charged to ready to fire for the next ignition event, the next cylinder. So when it's on this end here, it's called dwell. Current is flowing in the primary circuit, and the coils being charged. When it hits this high step, current stops flowing. You break the ground, the magnetic field collapses. You get spark at the secondary to the distributor, which goes to the spark plugs. Now that's what's old school. The newer vehicle obviously don't use points. They're replaced either with the PCM or ICM, initial control module. So today cars, the points do not exist. The points were replaced with the primary initial control module, or the PCM does the triggering. As you can see here, we got the points, we have our ignition coil, and we have a power transistor. That power transistor is internal of an initial control module, or the ICM is the initial control module, or the PCM that does the triggering. Remember, now the ICM or the PCM controls the current running through the primary circuit that trigger the secondary ignition circuit. Initial control module may be integrated into the PCM, so you won't be able to see the command, but you could see the primary activity between the coil, PCM, and the coil. The ICM may be external, so you can see the command between the PCM and ICM, and the primary voltage between the ICM and the coil. The ICM may be inside the coil on plug. Now that's another set. Some of the newer cars now, they got something called the coil on plug, meaning they don't have a distributor and no wires and no distributor cap. Basically, the coil is sitting right on top of the plug. In this case, you can see the PCM and ICM command, but you can't see the primary since the switching occurs inside the coil. Basically, the saying is the coil sits right on top of the plug, so you can't back probe it to see a primary circuit like you would do any other electronic ignition circuit. You can, but it's a little harder. So now we got started off with a set of points that did the triggering, that controlled the current flow. Went to the ICM that does it now, initial control module, or the PCM. Now we got coil on plug. When the module ICM is actually internal outside the coil on plug setup. On some cars, not every car. The computer controlled ignition. The PCM must know the crankshaft position in order to provide spark at the right time. The coil system also needs a cam sensor signal so that the correct coil sequence is command. Processing and timing control. The PCM makes engine position calculations and issue commands for the ignition control module to ground the coil primary. That's what I said earlier. On a computerized car, now need inputs into the computer to know when to ground the primary circuit to control the current flow for the primary ignition circuit before it fires the secondary. High current switching, the ICM must open and close the primary circuit to each coil at the correct time. For the correct duration, the PCM gives the ICM this information, so the ICM just carries out the orders. Secondary, the ICM grounds and ungrounds the coil primary circuit. When ungrounded, the collapsing field induces secondary voltage. That's basically what I said earlier. When you lose the ground, either from a points, ICM, or PCM, the primary current stops flowing, the primary field collapses, cuts across the secondary windings, then you get voltage out the coil to the spark plugs, which hopefully jumps the spark plug gap and ignites the compressed air-fuel mixture. And here's the distributor ignition. You can see Here's my distributor. Here's my wires. And right here is the coil wire going to the distributor. Here's a waste spark system, DIS, 3 coils. I said this earlier in the previous slide that one coil fires 2 cylinders at the same time. It's called the waste spark system. Here's a wiring diagram of the waste spark. You got 1, 2, 3 coils, and remember the V6, 3 coils. You can see it has 3 triggers, 1, 2, 3. Because it's only firing 3 coils. It's just one coil firing 2 cylinders. Now here's the coil and plug. Here's the coil and plug system. Look, no distributor cap, no distributor, no wires. It's just a coil sits on top of the plugs. And here's a wiring diagram on the coil and plug. We have, what's this? 8 coils? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 coils. You have 8 coils and 8 individual trigger points. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 triggering points, which is the ground. It controls the primary current flowing. The ground controls the primary current flowing in the primary circuit to fire the secondary, which is the coil. But now look at the voltage. They all coming from one spot, usually a power relay. Alright, they all go into some type of power relay. But you see down here, the grounds are individually. Each coil has its own ground because they're being fired individually. But the voltage source is coming from one source, the power relay. You don't need to have individual power supply. We just have individual grounds. Okay, that was a basic overview of the ignition circuit that we discussed in class. Hope you remember it. If you have any questions, let me know in class. Peace.